Here we go. All right, so this is going to be the section on things to be careful of during the exam, or things to pay attention to. So beginning with the beginning of the year, when we were collecting data. So in the collecting data form, we have a couple things that I really want to be careful of. One, we collect data, or we collect a sample to describe a population. All right, populations have parameters, and those are the things that we define when we're doing hypothesis tests. Samples are all written in English letters, parameters are in Greek letters. When you're doing a hypothesis test, you're going to be defining the parameter, and you should always be using the parameter values. So as sample size increases, the error or the variation about the parameter decreases. So as we increase the sample size, the variation about the mean decreases. Please note, sample size does not impact bias. All right, bias is basically you have a poorly designed study for some reason or another. Please make sure you review those definitions. Then we have the cluster sample and the stratified sample, and you need to make sure you know the difference, because that's likely to show up either in a FRQ or in a multiple choice, very likely. Stratified is where we're breaking it down into a group based on a common characteristics. Sometimes they like to say it's homogeneous, that is to say that everyone in that group has the same characteristic, as in all the freshmen are in one group, all the sophomores in one group, all the juniors in one group, etc. It's broken down on one characteristic. That's stratified. Cluster, you have little communities where every single cluster looks like the population. So you would have freshmen, sophomores, and juniors all grouped together, just like you have in the high school. Whereas in a stratified, they're divided up based on a common characteristic. Please also note that when you do a cluster, once you randomly select one or more clusters to survey, once you select it, you perform a census, that is, you survey everything in that. Then we move on to the difference between stratified and blocking. Key, they will deduct a lot of points if you're not careful of this. Blocking and stratified are the same things functionally, but stratified is for surveys only. Blocking is for experiments only. Please make sure that you use blocking for experiments and stratified for samples. Do not confuse them. And by the way, if you're in the middle of the test and you're like, you know what, I'm not 100% sure, and you start throwing out vocabulary words, bad idea. Don't throw out vocabulary words just because you know it is a vocabulary word. If you don't know what it means, don't use it, because it could really come back and hurt you. All right? Please understand that our control is to have as many conditions as to make sure that the conditions are similar as possible for anything but what we are experimenting. All right, so we want the differences so that we know that the differences is the treatment that we're watching. All right, what else? Make sure you know everything in regards to the elements and of experiments. I'm going to try to pause this if I can there. Okay, so Unit 2, that's displaying and describing data. Couple things, make sure anytime they ask you to display something, to describe something, that you always talk about center and you always talk about the spread. Center can be the mean or the median. Please remember how they're affected. The mean is affected by outliers, the median is not. Please and when you're talking about spread, it could be the range, it could be the IQR, it could be the variation or standard deviation. If unusual features exist, you must talk about them. All right. If unusual features exist, you must talk about them. And if there and with the exception of box plots, you're probably going to have to talk about shape as well. we don't like to say it's normal. We like to say it's mound shaped. So please keep that in mind and make sure you're very cognizant of the definition of skewed right and skewed left. You need to make sure that you know skewed right is being stretched to the right and the mean is above the median, and skewed left is stretched to the left and the mean is below the median. The other thing that I say is label your graphs. If necessary, over label your graphs. Remember, you don't really have to make a scale when you're doing box plots if you want to label the major points. Make a scale if that's easier for you. If making a scale is not your thing, then label the major points, the 5-number summary. All right. But make sure you label them correctly. Do not call the median the mean. Do not confuse those two. Okay.